The 2006 to 2011 Lexus GS sedan. This video is supposed to cover some interesting facts that you did not know regarding this vehicle. However, they've really scrubbed a lot of the previous press releases off of these journalist websites, so I couldn't find a whole lot of info. And this is back in the day where Lexus in general just did not share a lot of information about their cars. They don't go quite as in-depth in describing their vehicles like Acura and Honda. But regardless, I'm using multiple sources here, okay, the European website, the Canadian press website, and the United States. And then I'll bring out some other insights like the sales figures. And if you're still interested in purchasing these cars used, I can share some used car buying resources as well towards the end. Okay, so what is the 06 to 2011 GS all about? Well, this is their rear-wheel drive sedan in the lineup, built on the N platform. The front-wheel drive Toyota Lexus vehicles at the time were built on the K platform. In 06, when the GS got unveiled, it was an all-new model, of course, fully redesigned. Pretty much everything was new, and we had a GS 300 model and a GS 430. These cars were also available with all-wheel drive, at least for the V6 models. And pricing, the original MSRP ranged between 43 to 45 grand for the GS 300s and about $52,000 for the GS 430s. And then that price, of course, went up in the future when they came out with the GS 350, the GS 460, and the GS 450H hybrid. Okay, now the prices were closer to 46 to 49 grand for a GS 350. GS 460s, the original MSRP was around $54,000, and that hybrid was the most expensive at over $57,000. I'll get to those cars a little bit later, but this redesigned GS 300 was interesting because on the outside this looks like a bulbous, heavy car. However, in 2006, when this car got redesigned, a rear-wheel drive GS 300 was 100 pounds lighter than the previous generation, which is crazy to think about because that previous gen looks really small and lightweight. This new generation, it grew by about 2 inches in the wheelbase, so we have a 112-inch long wheelbase, and it's a little bit wider, a little bit taller, but the trunk space shrunk by about 2 cubic feet. This generation of GS has a pretty small trunk at about 12 cubic feet total, but the reason why the GS 300 was lighter than the previous generation was because Lexus moved on to a 3-liter aluminum block V6 with 245 horsepower and 230 pounds-feet of torque. The previous generation car also had a 3-liter engine, but it was a straight 6 iron block, so this engine weighed less. And the GS 430 of the time utilized the same engine from the LS 430 flagship, which is great because this engine is hyper smooth. In fact, in the LS 430, I think Motor Trend or Car and Driver, one of them, tested the LS 430 and they found out that car was quieter than the Rolls-Royce Phantom of the time. So that's how smooth this 430 engine is. And all of this was mated to a 6-speed automatic transmission, which was also all new for the time. It was a new transmission. And once again, the GS 300, it was available with all-wheel drive. It had a 30-70 torque split, but the computer was able to adjust that to a 50-50 power distribution if necessary. But talking about the 06 model year is pretty much pointless because in 2007, they did away with all of these engine options. I'm sure people who bought the 06 model years were really upset because now we have the GS 350 and the GS 460, and both engine options are producing a lot more horsepower and torque. With the 3.5-liter aluminum block V6, we now have 303 horsepower and 274 pounds-feet of torque. The fuel requirement for both of these engines was 91 octane premium, and I'm sure many people, they simply did not know about that. I feel like a lot of people just put regular in these cars. And the 0 to 60 time, certainly wasn't bad. It was 5.7 seconds for the GS 350 and 5.8 with the all-wheel drive GS 350. Now the 460s came with the 4.6 liter aluminum block V8 with 342 horsepower, 339 pounds-feet of torque. It did 60 in 5.4 seconds and had a top speed of 149 miles per hour. Fuel economy was average, 17 city, 24 highway. The 350, it's definitely the volume seller. It had so much power, nobody bothered to go with the V8, and that car got 19 city, 26 highway, and those figures drop by 1 if you go with the all-wheel drive. But later on, they also introduced the GS 450H, which nobody really wanted because it was over 57 grand, like I mentioned before, and you didn't get much of a fuel economy benefit. It got 22 city, 25 highway, which is okay, and it was 340 total system horsepower. And yes, you also had to use 91 octane in the hybrid. Okay, it had a 3.5 liter V6, made it to a nickel metal hydride battery pack, and this was technically the quickest GS on paper for this generation with 5.2 seconds 0 to 60, but the top speed was less at 131 miles per hour. But again, nobody bothered with this. The 350 was where it was at. At this point, these cars were using the 6-speed auto with the V6, but the V8s got the 8-speed automatic, similar to the LS 460. And really, that's just basic specs. Interesting facts, I mean, this third generation GS, when it launched, it was the first production Lexus to be styled with the company's new El Finesse design principles. And when the GS 450H hybrid launched, it was the world's first hybrid power car to feature a front engine and rear wheel drive powertrain. And some people argue this generation of the GS with its slope backed rear end, that this was technically the first 4-door coupe and not the Mercedes CLS. So Lexus people, you could claim that. You could claim this GS of this generation was the first 4-door coupe out there. So those are certainly some interesting facts. And as I mentioned, when the GS 300 first came out in 06, it was 100 pounds lighter, but of course the weight went up with the GS 350s and the GS 460s, so that didn't really matter anymore. Everything was all new with these vehicles, but what really set this generation apart is the sheer amount of electronics. It was a alphabet soup of safety features and driving tech that they implemented with these cars when it first came out. But I think everyone knows this. It's not like an interesting fact. Every other journalist already covered this with the VDIM, the VSC, the ABS, and ECB, and how everything worked together. Because yes, this generation of the GS, it used a electronic steering rack. If you went with the V8 models, you got the variable gear ratio steering, and also with the V8s you got the adaptive variable suspension, the AVS. And really the purpose of all these systems, it's for safety. It's to keep you in check. If the car ever detected that you were driving super aggressive, it would try its best to keep you back in check. And many reviewers of the time, they said that when you're driving this thing at its limits, it almost got annoying the way the electronic systems would just take over. But when you're just driving it like an average person, like the average Lexus driver, honestly, this wasn't a big deal. But that was certainly new with this generation. All of those electronics, all of those systems. And I'll get to the interior in a little bit, but there wasn't a F-Sport model. However, you were able to get F-Sport performance accessories. I'm not sure exactly what year this started, but I know it's definitely 2010 and up. And you could go to your Lexus dealership and purchase things like 19-inch forged alloy wheels, special brake features, suspension systems, an air intake, exhaust systems, and a lot more. I'm sure all of these things costed an absolute fortune at the Lexus dealership, but that was available to you. And Lexus claims that F-Sport performance accessories by Lexus USA are engineered by Toyota Racing Development, or TRD. When installed by an authorized dealer, the accessories are fully warranted for 12 months or for the balance of the new car warranty, whichever is greater. And the interior space is something that everybody praised. Everyone loved the seats, they loved the plushness, the design, it was very elegant. And the audio system, of course, that was a huge win. The bass audio is going to be a 10 speaker, 134 watt system, but that Mark Levinson ML audio, that's where it was at. It was a 14 speaker, 330 watt unit with a 7.1 channel speaker architecture, and it had less than a 0.1% of total harmonic distortion. And that really is great. And I also like the brushed gray metal gauge clusters. That looked really elegant. And I might as well just throw this in there too. This car had a coefficient of drag of 0.27. And aside from all this, there's not too many crazy interesting facts regarding this car, because they really scrubbed a lot of this information off the website. But even the early press releases that I can find didn't have any crazy juicy information in it. I mean, the obvious things like the electronics and the VDIM systems and all that, that was covered by other journalists already. And those were the main highlights. I mean, you had all new engines, you had new transmissions. I mean, that was really the big deal of the time. 07, when they came out with that GS 350 with near V8 levels of power. Yeah, I mean, that was just great, because back then the turbo and the twin turbo craze wasn't happening yet, and most of these naturally aspirated V8s were getting a little over 300 horsepower. Lexus comes out with the GS 350. That was really the one to go with in the lineup at the time. So in this next segment, I'll go ahead and I will talk about the sales figures for these cars. The sales figures on these GS models, it was abysmal. It was kind of strong when it first came out, selling a little over 30,000, then it dwindled into 25 and 17,000, and then it was down to the 4-figure range, selling 7 and 3,000 units, and then they redesigned it again in 2013. Then the sales shot back up with a little over 20,000 units for the 2013 generation and up, and then that quickly died off again to 7,000, 6,000, 3,000, 2,000 units sold per year. Okay, this is not monthly sales, this is for the year. Okay, you can just come to websites like goodcarbadcar.net and it will compile this information for you, and you can see how nobody is buying these sports sedans. In fact, the Lexus LS flagship, which ranged between $60,000 to $80,000, sold almost as many units as the GS, in certain years even outselling the GS. And that's just kind of how it works. You know, people who have money to splurge, they go to the top, and people who don't, they seek the value. And the ES clearly provides value because a front-wheel drive car is cheaper to produce, it's more efficient. An individual can just put snow tires on a front-wheel drive car and that will cover you for most winters in most places, unlike a rear-wheel drive car, while costing the individual less money to buy and also getting better fuel economy. And that's exactly what the ES has to offer, and that's all a Lexus shopper really wants at the end of the day, and the sales figures show that by selling 40, 50, 60, 70, 80,000 units per year consistently over 2 decades. A lot of people commenting are saying, yeah, let's stop producing the car that sells 70,000 units and let's keep the car that's selling 7,000. Yeah, that's just not very wise, and obviously Lexus is not going to do that, and that's why they stopped making the GS in 2020. Will they bring it back as an EV or a Sportback? Perhaps, but we'll have to see. Now let's go ahead and let's talk about some resources you can use if you're interested in buying a GS in the used car market. Alright, I like to use cargurus.com to search for used vehicles, and I like this website because you can sort out all of the accident vehicles, the theft, the frame damage, and the salvage title cars. You can do that very easily on this website because those are cars that you really don't want to mess with. Accident vehicles, you have no idea how the body shop is going to put these cars back together. It's never going to be back to OEM spec, and also when you go to sell the vehicle, you're never going to get as good of a trade-in value compared to a car that doesn't have an accident on it. So I just like to not mess with that. And when you sort out all of those accident cars and you dial in the years to 06 to 2012, there's only 106 cars for sale in the entire United States, because these vehicles didn't exactly sell very well to begin with. And many people will of course get excited by the $5,000 GSs with over 200,000 miles on it. Yeah, I obviously don't recommend that. In fact, I don't really recommend anybody buying these cars at all. This or the LS. I mean, the person who is looking to purchase cars like this in the used car market, they're clearly reaching, and they can barely afford to put the fuel in these cars, let alone maintain and put tires and oil in these cars, as well as insurance and property taxes. And if you want to see the issues that these vehicles have, you can just go to websites like nhtsa.gov or carcomplaints.com, and you can go to these websites. You can see the complaints that people have with the cars, and you can also, more importantly, see the manufacturer communications, or the TSBs, also known as technical service bulletins. These are the issues that the manufacturer themselves find with these cars, so that way I can just wipe my hands clean, and you now have a impartial resource that you can use, a government website that shows you all of the issues with these cars, because Lexus themselves found those issues. You can also see the recalls and any current investigations. And buying these used cars, it's the same story with all these luxury vehicles. You know, the actuators will go wrong, and that's going to cost you a fortune. People on the Club Lexus forum, how their GS 300 wasn't as reliable as they thought it would be. It's consuming a lot of oil, like a lot of these high mileage cars typically do, and all kinds of little electronic gremlins. You can have all-wheel drive issues. It's just the average person will not be able to maintain these cars when you get up to 150K, 200,000 miles. It's just too much to go wrong. Same thing with the Lexus LS. Suspension parts cost a fortune, and yeah, I simply can't recommend this to the average person. Not to mention, one person's 10,000 miles is the equivalent to another person's 100,000 miles, meaning you have no idea how some of these people drove these cars. And yeah, there's a reason why a lot of car journalists don't cover used cars, because they don't want to be liable for your purchasing decisions. Most people are not good at doing research, and if a big car reviewer recommends a used vehicle and someone goes out and buys it, and they're going to be like, oh, I bought this Lexus because you said it was bulletproof and you said it was super reliable, and then, you know, they have a $5,000 actuator goes out. Most car reviewers don't want to deal with that. They're also not interested in getting a billion DMs about, you know, used car issues and all of that stuff, which I don't blame them for that. That makes sense. I don't like talking about these clapped out cars either, but this is the message that most people need to hear. So me and most other car reviewers, we would rather just talk about new cars. That way, if a new car just blows up on you, it's not anybody's fault. You can just take it to the car dealership and you're under warranty, so they'll just give you a new car, because the consumer is going to be protected under a warranty. You buy these old clapped out vehicles, you're not protected by anything. There's no warranty. In fact, you can't even get financing for cars of this age anymore. Most banks won't finance this. And even if they do, you can expect to pay like 10 or 15% interest. So that's the reality of cars like this. Honestly, nothing wrong with financing a new Toyota Corolla or even a new Nissan Versa. You know, comes with a 5-speed manual. That's an enthusiast car, right? And there you go. And also a new car is going to be a lot safer too. So keep that in mind. Well, hopefully you learned something regarding this GS. Okay, a lot of people are going to blow me up on their forums and gaslight me, talking about how I badmouthed this car. You know, it's just a rotting, depreciating tin can with 4 wheels and some seats in it. I don't know why people worship this stuff so much. I get it. There are going to be certain people who have these vehicles and they will say things like, oh, I've had it for 800,000 miles and never had an issue with it. That's great, but that doesn't have to be everyone's experience. So let's try to be a little empathetic and understanding and realize that cars are random experiences. One person's experience doesn't necessarily have to reflect someone else's. I know of a master technician who has 2 Mercedes-Benzes with over 300,000 miles and no issues. I also know of people who bought new Corollas where the transmission blew out. So it's all over the place. This is why most people, including myself, only like to talk about new cars with warranties. So hopefully you understand. Thank you so much for watching. Take care and goodbye.